You are listening to Lighthearted, the official podcast of the United States Lighthouse Society. My name is Jeremy D'Entremont. Welcome. My co-host today is Cindy Johnson, volunteer for Friends of Portsmouth Harbor Lighthouses and Lighthouse Queen of Arizona. Hi, Cindy.
Hi, Jeremy.
Today is August 20th, 2022, and this is episode 187 of Lighthearted. Shortly, we're going to hear an interview I did when I was in England last month with Ronda and David Armitage, creators of the popular children's book, The Lighthouse Keeper's Lunch. It's good to be back home after a fantastic trip in England and Ireland for the entire month of July. So how's your summer going in Arizona, Cindy?
Well, as some of our listeners may know, I've been spending some time at my mom's in Tucson, and we're right in the middle of monsoon season now, which is it's pretty neat here. It's a little bit cooler, and we actually have rainstorms. So the desert, wildlife, plant life, and people, they all really seem to look forward to it. Everyone gets excited about rain.
And just a little while ago, before we started recording, there was a thunderstorm going on. Is that over now?
It is over now. Typically, well, like most warm climates, I think the storms tend to happen later in the day.
Yeah.
So like late afternoon, evening, sometimes overnight too.
Yeah.
But they're quite, some of these storms are quite spectacular with thunder and lightning and wind and don't necessarily last all that long. But everyone's happy with the water. Like I said, the wildlife, you see all the saguaro cacti kind of plump up from all the water they're holding, and everyone's just really always grateful for the rain.
Yeah. Here on the New Hampshire seacoast, it's been ridiculously hot, like for a week or so. Since I got home from Ireland, it's pretty much been in the 90s, but today was gorgeous. It was about 70 degrees and
good.
dry.
Okay. Yeah. Because we sort of keep an eye on it here, and there have been days where the temperature is higher there on the seacoast of New Hampshire than it is in Tucson. And that just doesn't seem right.
Yeah. It was nice to be able to breathe today for a change.
Right.
So to shift gears a little bit, there is something else I wanted to mention. A couple of weeks ago, August 7th was National Lighthouse Day. August 7th is the day when we celebrate the creation of a National Lighthouse Service in the United States in 1789. The first Public Works Act of the first Congress set up a lighthouse service. Usually we've done a special episode of the podcast for National Lighthouse Day. With all my traveling, that didn't quite happen this year. So I want to wish everyone a happy belated National Lighthouse Day. And next year, hopefully we'll get back to doing a special episode for that. So, Cindy, has anything notable happened on this date in lighthouse history?
Well, yes. Beachy Head Lighthouse in Oregon began service on August 20th, 1873. It's 93 feet tall and is the tallest lighthouse tower in the state. A group called Friends of Beachy Lighthouses helps to preserve it, along with Beachy Bay Lighthouse, which was established in 1871. There's some current interior restoration work happening at Beachy Head Lighthouse, and tours will resume when the work is completed. I actually got to visit both lighthouses back in 2005. I remember touring the keeper's quarters at Beachy Bay, beautifully restored with original furnishings.
Yep.
But my favorite memory is looking down from the top of Beachy Head Lighthouse and seeing whales.
Oh, wow.
That was really cool. Yeah.
That is really cool. Yeah, I visited them both in 2015 when I drove the entire West Coast. I was working on a book on West Coast lighthouses. And you're right, Beachy Bay, they do a great job there. It's a neat place to visit. But unfortunately, Beachy Head Lighthouse was closed when I was there, so I didn't get to climb it. That must have been cool.
It was awesome.
Yeah.
Especially since I do tend to get seasick, so I wouldn't be one to sign up for a whale watching cruise.
Right.
And when we looked down from the top of the tower, there was a whale watch boat right there too. And so they were getting a really close up, a nice view of the whales, but that boat was getting really tossed around. So it was nice for me that I had this whole whale watching experience from a lighthouse, which is really unique and awesome in itself, but also that I didn't have to sort of suffer on this whale watch boat in order to see that. So it was awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, I was during that same trip on the West Coast, I was at Point Vicente in Southern California
Hmm.
near Los Angeles. And it's a very dramatic lighthouse up on a high cliff. And right near there's a whale watching center, and they count the gray whales as they migrate past
Oh,
there in the
yeah.
spring. So I got to see kind of the tail end of that,
Cool.
some
The
distant
tail.
whales.
No, no pun intended there.
There was no pun intended, but now that you mention it, yeah.
I was going to say when I was at these lighthouses up in Oregon there, I think I remember doing some damage in the gift shop as well.
Mm,
Pretty sure.
not in a literal sense, I hope.
No.
So I think it's time that we should move along here and tell everybody about today's guests, Rhonda and David Armitage.
I agree. Ronda Armitage, originally from New Zealand, first went to England in 1966. Her husband David was born in Tasmania. In the late 1970s, after their success with the children's book The Lighthouse Keeper's Lunch, they moved to England to stay. Rhonda was a primary school teacher for several years, and she is a trained counselor specializing in family therapy. She has written more than 30 books, including several nonfiction books for older students.
Here is a description of their book, The Lighthouse Keeper's Lunch. Quote, every day, Mr. Grinling, the lighthouse keeper, cleans and polishes his light to make sure it shines brightly at night. At lunchtime, he tucks into a delicious and well-deserved lunch prepared by his wife. But Mr. Grinling isn't the only one who enjoys the tasty food. Will Mrs. Grinling think of a way to stop the greedy seagulls from stealing the lighthouse keeper's lunch? Unquote.
There have been a number of sequel books to The Lighthouse Keeper's Lunch. Most of Rhonda's children's books are illustrated by her husband David, who is an artist. In addition to his work as a children's book illustrator, David Armitage is regarded as one of the UK's leading abstract artists. He has been described as a supreme colorist, and his art is sold all around the world.
I had a chance to sit down with Rhonda and David Armitage during my stay at the Belle Tout Lighthouse in July. Belle Tout, that's T-O-U-T, and it sounds like it should be French, but it's actually, I guess, from a Celtic name, strangely enough. But anyway, Belle Tout is about a mile from Beachy Head Lighthouse, which was the inspiration for the book The Lighthouse Keeper's Lunch and its many sequels. It was the perfect setting, and it was a real pleasure talking with Rhonda and David. So let's listen to our conversation now. I am here at the Belle Tout Lighthouse, and I don't know if my guests have an opinion on how you pronounce the name of this place, but Belle Tout Lighthouse here near Eastbourne, England, is spelled like it's a French name, but I understand it's actually a Celtic name. But anyway, I'm so happy to be here with Rhonda and David Armitage, who have kindly consented to come to meet me here at the Lighthouse this evening from their home. And, of course, Rhonda and David have produced the great series of children's books, The Lighthouse Keeper's Lunch, and all its sequels. Rhonda's the writer and David's the artist. Thank you so much for joining me, Rhonda and David. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, too. Thank you.
So, first of all, Rhonda, yes. I understand you actually grew up in New Zealand. Right, and could you maybe tell me a little bit about your early life in New Zealand and how maybe that informed your interest in lighthouses or anything like that?
Yes, I was born on the South Island of New Zealand, a place called Kaikoura, which is very connected to the sea. You know, mountains at the back, sea down at the front. Years ago, it was an old whaling station, which must have been hideous, but beautiful down. And then my father was a farmer. Well, my parents both really were farmers, and we moved to a farm further north, and eventually, when I was about 12, we moved to a farm that was in the most beautiful part of New Zealand, a place called the Coromandel Peninsula, and it was right at the top. And not a very good farm, but very beautiful place. You walk down to have a swim in the morning, through fields, but you could do that quite easily. And I used to go to sleep watching a lighthouse flickering on what's it called, Great Barrier Island, a long way out in the distance. But our life there, when I wasn't at boarding school, was about the sea. It was, going swimming, taking out boats. But in the other direction, slightly further south of where we were, there was quite a big lighthouse, 3 lighthouse keepers, as there have to be these days, as people probably know. And we would go out. In fact, I think we only went out twice, maybe 3 times. We didn't have a big enough boat to do it. But occasionally somebody else would take us out, and I thought, wonderful, this would be great. I don't quite know why, because this when I was 13, 14, 15, you would have thought I would have wanted something slightly more social. But I think it was probably quite a nice change from boarding school. So that was really my association with lighthouses, if you like, very briefly. But also it was, it's a sea country, New Zealand.
Oh, yeah.
And in those days, not so much now, you left the city to have your fun. The cities were too small in a way to offer a great deal. They offer far more now, although they're hardly immense.
Right.
So we were very used to going out and being by the sea. We used to have batches, what they call batches on sea fronts. Can't do that now. You're not allowed to sell small chunks of land along the coast, as far as I know. Of course, they're trying to protect the coastline now.
Sure, yeah.
So that was, it was a brief association, but much well remembered.
Oh, I would say so. And David, you're originally from Tasmania, is that correct?
Tasmania, of course, yes, it is. It's quite a reasonable kind of size, but of course, put next to Australia, its neighbour,
Right.
it looks very small. But of course, it's an island,
Yeah.
and has a very insular perhaps feel about it. Very small population, coasters everywhere, and the seas around Tasmania, across Bass Strait and the southern coast, can be the roughest and toughest in the world.
Yes.
And like the Sydney Hobart yacht race, much famed, you do that at your peril.
Yeah.
But of course the coast, yes, I was good by the coast, but and also, but the lighthouses not particularly, but living by the sea and lovely beaches. Go 20 kilometres, 30 kilometres of sandy beach, and you'd be the only thing there. That's it.
Yeah.
For that, and still that prevails in parts of it today.
Yeah.
So in a way, it's idyllic, and I do remember that. And of course, now it makes extremely good wine, which I had a little a bit of.
Always enjoyed, I'm sure,
Yeah,
my lighthouse keepers as well.
Pinot
I'm
Noirs.
sure.
Pinot Noirs.
Oh, I love Pinot Noir.
Yeah. Anyway, they do it very well. So it's in the visually. It was certainly in my head.
Yeah.
The sea and all that went on within it.
Right, yeah. So this is a question for either or both of you. What brought you to England?
Well, we'd been here before. And David was based in Melbourne, had finished art college in Melbourne, and I'd been teaching for several years. In those days, New Zealanders and Australians, you're a long way from the sort of what was still regarded as the central, as the sort of Western universe. So lots of us went, caught little ships, big ships actually, and headed to England, which is precisely what we did. And we met on board ship.
Okay.
So romantic. He was very good at table tennis. He was prepared to play it in the middle of the night.
Yes, it was yes, I got on the ship in Melbourne in Australia, which then went to Auckland in New Zealand once Ronda got on. So that's how we met. But that's this boat, a rather fine Greek ship, which I describe as a million rivets sailing in formation, I would have thought.
I don't know you want to tell the Greeks know about that. That doesn't exist any time.
Anyway, we met on the boat. And Ronda was a great table tennis player. It took me, I think, 50 years or thereabouts before I could actually beat her at that. So we met. And we came to England, yes.
We stayed for a year, and then because we really felt we needed to go home to meet relatives, meet each other's parents, we went back to New Zealand. And were there for about 7 years. David worked in the art gallery and various other those sorts of areas. I went back to teaching. We had 2 small children, and then he had a sell-out exhibition. He was painting and doing really well, and he had been on a sort of bursary for a whole year.
Yeah.
So we thought, why don't we go back to... Oh no, we wanted to move the staircase in our house. Lovely house, but built in a strange way. And nobody was interested. New Zealand was doing rather well at the moment, so they were building houses, not moving staircases. So we thought, well, why don't we go to England?
The children hadn't started school, of course.
No,
so.
one was 8 months and the other was 3. It was too difficult to go back because taking small children on planes that fly for 24 hours like that. Well, the trip was 24 hours, broken in the middle, when they missed the plane anyway.
Because it was the invention of the Boeing 707, of course, so the ships were just suddenly stopped, all of that. So you flew on a plane, but and the 2 children, yes, were quite small. And anyway, we arrived here.
Yeah. And then a couple of years later, because David had started taking work around,
Illustration.
illustrated design and then illustration, and people have expressed interest, and so I said, why don't you get her to write a book? And I had worked in children's with quite a famous person in New Zealand who had 8 children and was passionate about picture books. So I'd had my teaching period in New Zealand had been very much surrounded by books. And since I was small, in fact, books were very much part of my world.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting and thinking, oh, for heaven's sake, what a silly idea.
Well, it wasn't. Well, Rod has put it accurately, but in the course of hawking my illustrations around, I would do folk and fairy tales, of course, which they're free and demonstrate. And one guy, I still remember him. He looked at all this stuff and said, "You can do this. Go and do your own story. Get a story. Don't do all this stuff."
Oh, he didn't offer it to me initially. I thought he had.
No, he was unaware of your existence, I think. But he just told, I need to come up with a story, either by me or by proxy or from somewhere, rather than a folk and fairy tale. And then I came home to Ronda and said, look, how do you feel about writing a story? What do you reckon about that? And then following quickly on, shortly thereafter, not a million miles from where we are here, we brought the children down, aged 1 and 3 or something, to look at the Beachy Head Lighthouse. And our son, and this is the word serendipity can scarcely cover this, asked me, "Dad, what's the wire for running from the lighthouse to the coast? What's it for?" And Dad, he comes up with the odd one-liner, said, "Oh, that's for the lighthouse keeper's lunch." You know? And Ron we started weaving this thing.
Yeah, but it was funny. What was interesting in a way, sorry to break it, is that if you're thinking about things, there'll suddenly be something that just clicks in.
Yeah.
That's really how that. He could have said it at other times. It would take the slightest bit of.
Well, we did have a
notice.
friend with us who heard the conversation,
that's right.
and he said, "Look, I hear you looking around for well, that's not a bad idea, is it? Particularly those seagulls stealing the lunch." But that was, as our son now keeps reminding us, if he hadn't asked that question, would there be any lighthouse books? Probably not.
But the other part about that was that going home, as far as publishers were concerned in those days, wouldn't matter in the slightest now, was not something they were very keen on, because to a certain extent you're required to sell your books, and certainly even now a lot of children's writers will be working in schools because that's a very big market, and books for children in schools it sort of waxes and wanes a bit, but on the whole, children are encouraged still to read.
Sure.
And so they said, could we sort of stick around? And we went on sticking around, really.
Yes.
We have been home a number of times, of course, and to Tasmania. But we've been here now for about 45 years, I think.
Yeah. Wow. And you said the 45th anniversary of Lighthouse Keeper's Lunch. You showed me the special edition that's come out.
Yes, it must be more like 47 years. Yeah, sorry.
Okay. Yeah. So, David, I want to talk about your art some more shortly, but Rhonda, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned you were a teacher. You have a background as a teacher and counselor, right?
Yes, yeah.
How does that kind of work together? How do the 2 or 3 careers work with each other? How does that kind of influence your children's book writing?
I mean, I've never written this, but picture books are fairly short, but it's amazing how even 6, 7, and these days they're shorter again.
Right.
When we first started writing, they were much more picture story books,
Mm-hmm.
longer stories, and lovely picture books.
I know what you mean, yeah.
But now, of course, so many of the illustrators, brilliant illustrators, but the stories have got shorter.
Yes.
Parents have less time to read. Schools are so busy combining all sorts of subjects. It's partly a time thing. It's not entirely that, but it's just partly that.
Yeah.
And there are brilliant illustrators of us as well. That has perhaps changed a bit more. They see it as a wonderful occupation, whereas I think before it was probably they'd rather be painting or something, that bit.
Mm-hmm.
So it was always a passion for books. So going back, go back to the original question again. And teaching, when I first started teaching, that was as the explosion of picture books.
Yeah.
And I taught at a very little school in New Zealand. 30 children in the school. We had 2 teachers, myself and the head teacher, and we walked down the road and over there to the sea. So my first school was beside the sea in the South Island, actually, a place called near Akara. So, books have always been a major part of my life.
Sure.
And the sea has just fitted it around that, to be fair to say.
Yeah. So going back to the book specifically, the Lighthouse Keeper's lunch. I always want to say the lighthouse keeper's wife because a woman I knew, the great Connie Small, who passed away at 103, and I knew her quite well. She wrote a classic book called The Lighthouse Keeper's Wife.
Right.
So I have to catch myself every time when I say the title. But anyway, as you said, it's based. It was inspired by the Beachy Head Lighthouse, and it looks like the Beachy Head Lighthouse in the book and its sequels, and which is right outside here. You can see it right where we're sitting, from almost where we're sitting. There's a wall in the way, but it's right down there. There's a lot of neat stuff about the life of the lighthouse keeper and his wife, but were they based on specific people or loosely based on any research of keepers?
They were just
It was imagination.
Wholly invented.
Yeah, and I have to say, not very acceptable, which I can sort of understand. I'm not a cook, so I was hoping that she would help me out, perhaps, I don't know. But it was very much the old-fashioned, he works, she cooks. So countries like Sweden, not only did they think that was not a good idea, given the way the world, and I quite agree, I'm a great believer in men and women working. But also Mr Grinling was too ugly. We were insulted by that.
Insulted by what? Indeed, but the one art life crossover undoubtedly was Hamish the cat. Now, I've been illustrating this ginger Tom cat in the book. There he is. I knew him inside. Terrific. We had no such thing. Then one morning at the house, the book had just been published, I think, or going. Children rush upstairs. Mum, Dad, come and look at this cat down on the mat. Oh, that was Hamish. He was more like Hamish than the Hamish I'd been drawing. And it transpired that Hamish had been chucked out of a house up the road because he'd just eaten the whole of a child's birthday cake. So he was in disgrace. And he came to live with us. Basically, he was a thug. But he was just an amazing cat. And we kept him until he...
And you named him Hamish.
And of course we did. What else could he be? And he lived at... and then one day, as cats do, time came and nobody found him. He just left. But he was... You wouldn't trust him as far as you could throw him, but I loved him to death.
No, I've known lots of cats in my life, so I completely understand. That's one of my questions. You cut me off at the pass, but I was going to ask about Hamish. Was he inspired by a real cat? So he wasn't, but then he kind of came to life.
He came to life with a vengeance.
If I may say, he didn't actually eat the whole of the birthday.
Oh.
He was a big cat, but he couldn't manage the whole of the birthday.
I think there might have been...
frosting. He might have liked the frosting, I would think.
There might have been one or two other indiscretions on his behalf, knowing what happened later with us. Yeah, lovely.
My cat presently looks like he could eat a whole birthday cake.
Yes.
So the Lighthouse Keeper's Lunch was quite a hit, very popular.
We were very lucky. And there was a lot of luck in this world and in all sorts of things. People talk about talent, that's great, but it was luck. It was luck.
Well, it's both.
It's nice to have a bit of both, actually, it'd be fair to say.
Yeah.
It's putting yourself in the right place at the right time. And
Yes. The first group, who looked at it first? Collins.
No,
The original person who talked about it.
Yes, it was the guy who...
And they'd had 3 new authors, and you have to sell foreign editions. And of course the best place is to sell to the States. And they'd missed out on 3 different lots, which 3 different new authors.
Titles,
and so they weren't prepared to take on another one because they were just losing money. So that was very...
But a sort of little vignette on that was the guy that was giving me back the dummy book that I'd done to me at this publisher who had just rejected it for good reason. And he's looked me in the eye. He wouldn't let it go. He was holding on to it to give it to me. And he said, "You mark my words, you've got a book there. Don't ever give up on this one." And thus it proved, Sort of
and
lovely,
then
man.
Collins lost it.
Yes.
They lost the whole manuscript.
Now the publisher lost it.
They mislaid it.
no.
Yeah.
Terribly apologetic. We got it back.
Yeah.
But the lovely bit was I came home. David had been up to Andre Deutsch then, who had a bit, and there was a great big canvas across the garage door in the house that we were renting. And it said, "Yes, they've taken it, and they want more." It was the day before Christmas, so it was fantastic.
Wow.
2 days before
Absolute,
Christmas.
yes.
Yeah, so it was lovely, I have to say.
Yeah.
It's good.
That's wonderful.
But the other, pursuant to that, of course, the next, we did loads of books and things, but how long was the gap between the first and the second? I think our editor said Have you thought about doing another story? But that must have been between that and the catastrophe, about, what, 15 years or something?
No, it was 8 or 9 years. We've done about 4 other books in between.
Yeah, I know, I couldn't remember.
Yeah.
But it was quite a gap.
But then the other sequels came closer
They came
together,
closer.
right?
Much closer together.
And there's been 8? Is that right?
Yeah, well, it'll be 9.
Okay.
I think it's 10.
No, it's 10
That's
now.
9.
10.
Isn't it? I thought
9, because one was printed in a small format,
You see, we have
which they did with all the books at one stage.
Yeah.
And but it didn't last the distance.
Okay.
You see
Yeah, I think that's not included. I bought a set of 8.
Yeah, they're done as a set of 8, but you can see Rhonda and I have a vice-like grip of how many books we've done. But I think it's 10.
Yeah.
I think it's 10.
No.
Anyway.
Yeah, sorry.
Well, it's 8 or so,
Eight,
or 9 or so.
They just
definitely
have the
eight,
lighthouse
yeah,
people. Which
yeah.
is
And it's been published in 3 languages, I read.
It's in China. The Chinese.
Yeah.
We've never seen a copy of what the Chinese
Oh, I'd love
do.
to see
They'd
that.
say the Chinese have been wonderful at buying the books,
Yeah.
but I think they abridge them and do different things, and they've just upped the numbers they're going to buy, which is also quite interesting.
Yeah.
So that's been fantastic.
It must be so nice and rewarding when you hear from people who either enjoyed the books as when they were kids,
Yes.
or their
Yes.
children or grandchildren are enjoying them now, or both of the above.
Actually, we're up to great grandchildren.
Well, I wasn't gonna say that.
Of course it is. It's deeply gratifying
lovely.
when,
It's
you, when you hear
Yeah.
you read reviews of grandparents particularly who read them to their kids and so on, and now their grandchildren, and loads and loads of those. Of course, it's quite humbling in a way that these things have just gone on.
Yeah.
And of course, I don't even question that Rhonda and I, as part of this enterprise, have worked a lot in schools in our age group,
Yeah.
Key Stage 2, with these kids. And I wouldn't speculate how many thousands of children.
Key Stage 1, but in
Key Stage 1, I'm sorry, we've worked with, but it'd be both in this country and abroad.
Yeah.
And it's lovely to work with your audience. These are your audience.
We don't do much of that now.
Okay.
It's the travelling as much as anything.
Yeah. Have you done any Zoom things with kids?
We do. We've done some. In fact,
That was Dubai or somewhere, wasn't it?
Abu Dhabi.
Abu Dhabi.
Yes. And the furthest we ever worked was on Sakhalin Island, off the coast of Siberia, where there was a shell school and had to have all English. I think they were more English
international
staff,
school.
International school.
Wow.
And that was quite an experience, I have to say, because it was oil had been found. There was new refineries surrounded by loads of ships that had been wrecked into the sea, or just were dumped basically. So it was quite a contrast, quite a place.
Sakhalin Island, yes indeed. And,
Anyway,
Yeah.
So that was that. But I mean, most amusing anecdote, which I'll try and keep short, about working with
Impossible, darling.
with children. She used to be an editor. Okay, 150 kids, 5, 6, something. The format we follow is Rhonda talks and introduces the subject and talks about books and so on. The kids, and they vote with their feet or their mouths if you don't get it right. I have a big A1 sheet of paper and I draw for them. And I do an outline sketch of the scene of the lighthouse. And then this is not for the faint-hearted, the children will chuck up suggestions from the floor of what they would like, which is fair enough in the sea. So anyway, thus it goes. Somebody wants a whale, somebody wants an octopus, and a little girl put her hand up, and I don't know what she wanted, a starfish or something. And I said to her, look, you just have to wait for a moment. I've got these several other things to do before I get to yours, but I will. And a dead silence in the hall. She stood up and said, he can't multitask.
You could sort of hear her mother somewhere.
I was carrying about 400 felt pens. I just dropped them all. And the teachers go, just guffawing with laughter.
Yeah.
But the upside of it is when you've got these kids, the bell rings and they don't even want to leave the hall. And this is not making this up, and it's not delusion. And the teachers don't even want to move. And it's. To me, it was one of the richest experiences of my life.
I can see
doing
that.
Love it.
Absolutely.
And you would never ever shortchange kids because you do that at your peril. So anyway, that's a bit of.
I didn't know we wanted to.
No. Anyway, I
love that. I love.
Anyway, that's enough of that. But it's a very moving part of the business.
I understand that. I got to talk to kids and give kids lighthouse tours sometimes. I know.
Yes, yeah. And it's yes, yeah.
Yeah, I completely understand. It's wonderful. It's really rewarding. So to talk a little bit more about your art, David, I think we've alluded to it a little bit, but you're, in addition to illustrating the children's books, you are an abstract artist.
Yeah, yes, I am. I'll cover this down again quite quickly. But I don't know, since I was 3 years old, about that, I used to sit on the floor with pens and paper and stuff, making marks. And to me, that's making marks is the most magical form of something I know or ever likely to. And I followed it right through, went to art school, studied illustration and painting. I was there for 5 years, did all this stuff. And both disciplines, of course, are quite different, but in keeping them in some kind of solution, it can be difficult, schizoid. But, you don't want your illustrations to look like paintings and vice versa. Anyway, two branches. One is illustrating, which I love doing, and the best thing for the illustrator you can do is marry a damn fine writer.
That's true. That is indeed very, very true. Or even better, you do both yourself.
Yeah, and paintings. Yes, I love the magic marks. Particularly, what's driven in that is the American painting around the abstract expressionists, Rothko, Still, all those guys. Which is some of the greatest paintings around that I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And the scale and the colour, particularly with Rothko, is as great a painting as you ever like to see. So that's the other discipline I do.
There are some other American painters.
Oh, there are loads more, but those I'm trying to keep this short.
Exciting.
But those guys, of course, there's
Jackson Pollock.
Jez Pollock, and there's all of those people. Yeah, loads of Gottlieb and so on and so forth. I know them all, but just that kind of colour, and as a colourist, colour is everything.
Yeah, Ronda just mentioned Jackson Pollock. I saw a video of you, and I'm sure you get compared to Jackson Pollock a lot. Not that the finished product is necessarily similar, but some of your technique.
I do find that this is not to do with spectacle or anything. I do pour colour, pour it out of buckets, and listening to music, all over the floor, everywhere, and the thing forms. But the greatest thing that can happen is accident, and you don't know sometimes while you pour it what's going to happen.
Can I just mention Mr. Accident, because part of it about the accident is how the person looking at it perceives it. In other words, accident can't just be an accident. It would be for me, oh dear, whereas they would look at it and see something there that then begins to become some other shape or idea from somewhere else. And I think that's about a leap into the imagination to some extent.
It's kind of a mysterious process.
Well, it is a mysterious process, but of course you can't just chuck it all around and say, "Oh, isn't that lovely?" Gosh, isn't it? It isn't. It has to have intellectual rigour. I mean, a painting, music, book, anything is only as good as its weakest part, and you can't have any of them. Even though it looks like you've done it in 30 seconds, but it's taken you 30 years, to get it right. And I love doing that stuff. Yeah. And very quickly I do the books on Schubert, song cycles. I've done all three, and that again is totally accident. To start them off is like a monoprint of glass, chucking colour around until you peel the paper back. You've got no idea what's going to happen, and accidents will happen in there which you'd never have thought of. Yeah. The skill or the trick is to recognise them.
Although in fact they resemble an illustration more than actually
of course they do.
Painting.
It's a bit of hybridising, I suppose, in a way.
Yeah.
But why not? And I love the music to death. So.
Why should you limit it to?
Exactly. Absolutely. So I'm probably going on a bit here, but
no, it's all really interesting. But I'm wondering, with the book illustrations, with the Lighthouse Keeper books and the other ones you've done together. Let's talk about the Lighthouse Keeper illustration specifically. How did you decide on a certain style for this drawing?
Yeah, that was just a natural. That's a terrible thing. It's a really good question. I don't know. It was intuitive, really intuitive.
Yeah.
And Ronda's going to hate me for this, but I haven't read The Lighthouse Keeper's Breakfast for probably 15, 18 years. It's been sitting on the shelf. It's at least that old. And a while back, I read it. I picked it up and read it. And I was laughing out loud. The humour.
They are very funny.
In her writing is brilliant.
Yeah.
And again, the risk of immodesty, the hybridisation of the words and the images is symbiotic.
Yeah.
You can't tell one from the other. And I suspect what I'm trying to say to him is the words that have from her have fashioned the style I adopted. To answer your question,
That's a great answer. That makes absolutely perfect
and I
sense.
mean that.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
But it has at times become, more recently I've had lots of other illustrators, and that in part is because when David was doing a lot of abstract painting and has moved more in that direction, doing the two has become more difficult for him. So I very rarely have David, certainly does all the Lighthouse Keeper books, but there are 10 or 12 books that he hasn't done. I think
so there won't be any more Lighthouse Keeper sequels, is that right?
that's what we said about 6 books ago.
Yes, it's.
I think probably not.
Probably not. I don't know. I mean, to feel your way back into you've fashioned a world, whether you like it or not, and you've got to respect this world. Otherwise, your audience will come out and kill you if you mess around with the character.
It's kind of like a movie. Sometimes they make, if it's popular, they make a sequel, or they should just leave it alone.
Yeah, leave it exactly. Quit while you're ahead.
Yeah.
But I doubt it. I wouldn't think so. As Rhonda was saying, I'm so involved with the painting that the schizoid thing, to get back into that world is quite a gear change, even though I love it. I know them so well. I mean, they're family after all, aren't they?
They must feel like family,
Of course they do. And, and now we've got Trevor, the cat, instead of Hamish, but that doesn't...
Trevor?
Trevor, yeah. He hates Hamish, but I'll tell you about that.
I think there's a sequel in the making, starring Trevor.
Yeah.
So we've mentioned that you have written at least several other children's books besides the Lighthouse Keeper series.
Yes, and it was a series of, and at the same time I did have other jobs as well. Well, the other job, a counselling job.
Yeah.
But picture books are short. Even though I do probably write them 25 times, changing every word. I'm so glad I don't write novels when I have to do all that changing. I've got people I know who write novels.
Yeah.
They rewrite the whole novel.
I know.
3, 4, 5 times. You think, goodness.
It's.
But yeah, and that was the first one I ever wrote with anybody else. I was so used to helping David with the illustrations. So
to which he's
help this other
profoundly,
person with
eternally
illustrations.
grateful.
But you never meet.
Yeah.
You probably know the illustrator.
I know. I've heard that in a lot of cases. Yeah.
But after about 4 suggestions of changing things, they pointed out that the illustrator was very pregnant, and she really was coming to the end of my useful suggestions. So after that, I just kept going.
Amazing.
Anyway, yes.
Yeah. Any particular other ones you've done besides the Lighthouse Keeper series that our listeners might, you think people who like those would like one or more of your other books, especially?
But they are very different from that. There is one that's published in the States, which is illustrated by, I can't remember her name. It's called A Mighty Bitey Creature.
Okay.
Which is very much a sort of more contemporary, slightly more contemporary style, if you like. Lovely colour, lovely novel.
That's a great title.
Yeah, and there was one about pirates being very popular. Unfortunately, pirates aren't liked very much in Europe because they used to get pirated, I suspect. There was another series about what was
it? Oh, it was a very strange creature, I thought.
Very strange creature. What was the other one?
The other one about the dragon.
Small Knight and George.
That's a lovely story.
And more recently, there have been slightly more. I don't know. No, forget that bit. But they've varied quite. Would be fair to say. But they're not any of them really like the Lighthouse Keeper books.
Yeah.
And they're mostly shorter. Picture books are much shorter. The text is much shorter, so you have to need more room for the illustration. But it's just how it's changed over the years.
Yeah.
Publishing particularly children's picture books now, is a very different activity in a way. That's not quite the right word to what was happening 40 years ago. I mean, children read in all sorts of other ways. They have television. They have iPads, they have all these sorts of things. Even the very smallest are watching on their little phones or mother's phone or something like that. So it is a very different process.
Oh, yeah. One thing I haven't asked that I meant to ask early on, but what is the targeted age, would you say, for the Lighthouse Keeper books?
Well, we've had 2-year-olds, but I think they were probably 2-year-olds who've been read to a lot and probably talked about it, and that's lovely. Talking about the pictures. the advantage we have slightly, or if you like, is that because there's no children in the books, except a great nephew who pops up occasionally, but not in those ones, you can use them with much older children too, who maybe are not finding reading such a likeable activity, or have difficulties in learning things anyway. And of course, there are no children, so they're not being compared with, somebody's not saying, oh, no, you're reading books, with the children much younger than you, that sort of thing. But so they are used there quite a lot.
The actual ages, they'll be with 4, 5, 6.
Yeah.
Generally be 4, 5, 6.
And that thing.
Three, 4, 5.
But some of the lighthouses have been done in like a reader form with larger type. Like bigger point size. We did a series of those little A5 books of the lighthouse stories. And they for readers, slow readers. I'll show you.
No, they were the same books.
Yes, of course they are.
Yeah, but
they're not different. But they're repackaged to look like a chapter story. Not a picture book, but a chapter book.
Okay.
Same story, but and it stays, and it seems to have gone
But
well.
the reason for that is that parents like their children, when they get to about 5 or 6, to be moving swiftly onto chapter books. And that's what happened with these. And so not nearly as much illustration. So if you're in a school, then what we call year twos, which are sort of 5, 6-year-olds, their parents would love it if they'd be buying one of these. But the children wouldn't necessarily pick them up on.
I don't see why there has to be a sudden.
No, of course not. Of
It's
course
just
not.
one of those little.
I mean, I'm more than 5 or 6, and I still like picture books.
I was quoting to somebody the other night. Do you remember Horse and the Elephant Hatched an Egg?
The Dr. Seuss.
It was my first book I ever was passionate about, and it said I said what I meant and I meant what I said. And elephants, no, I meant what I said and I said what I meant. And elephant's faithful 100%. And he sat on that egg on the tree right through the snow. And Maisie Bird went off to Florida.
Maisie Bird, she was a bit of a dead loss, wasn't she? She went off to Florida, didn't she, in the sun?
Yeah, well, she was having a wonderful time. Yes, anyway, that's where it's that's the first book I really remember. Still got it. I've got 2 copies actually.
Yeah, well, I was raised on Dr. Seuss and Winnie the Pooh from a very young age.
Yeah.
Those are chapter books, and I was really small when those were read to me.
I hope you've been to see the Paddington films. Paddington Bear?
Yeah, I've seen some of that. I'm not a Paddington aficionado. I probably should be.
No, well, actually, he came.
Do you say I should?
Own.
You hope I should have or haven't?
No, because we didn't actually read a lot of them when the children were younger either. But they're very good movies.
That's what I hear. Yeah.
And the Queen she had Paddington when she had the Jubilee thing.
Okay.
She had Paddington with his marmalade sandwich and wondering what she had. Actually, it was a very funny bit of the Jubilee. There was Paddington.
Very slickly done that.
From the film Paddington.
Yeah.
And there's the Queen showing her handbag, saying, where I keep my marmalade sandwich. Absolutely lovely.
Yeah. So let me ask you to kind of shift gears back to lighthouses again for either or both of you. Do you consider yourself lighthouse aficionados at this point? Or I guess aficionados would be the right word rather than buffs. Or what, do you love lighthouses in general? There's something you...
Oh, I would love... I'd love to be doing the trip you're doing because they vary so enormously in terms of where they're placed and the fact that you can stay in some of them now, and some are they're not very. I don't know how many. I don't think there are no man ones left in this country, or woman ones, because I think one of the last.
Yeah, the last were automated more than 20 years ago.
Yeah.
But I think in 1 or 2 places there are people who sort of keep more of an eye on the.
Yeah, there are. Well, then they have what they call attendant keepers in the UK who, but don't live at them anymore.
I think I don't know the aficionado, although we have been shown over lots of different lighthouses.
I mean, and certainly from a physical manufacturing point of view, some French guy, I think, came up with the idea of lenses within the light, which would amplify the light.
Fresnel.
And it was staggering, this achievement.
It is.
And we saw that up in Scotland, at a lighthouse they had, and the guy explained it.
Yeah.
Not Peterborough.
Something Borough. Anyway, and explained in front of what this guy had done.
Yeah.
And the projection from this invention was quite stunning.
Sunborough on the Shetlands, is that what you're referring to? Or?
Well, it still sticks in my head.
It's on the north-east coast of Scotland, just in India across into Inverness, and I can't for the life of me remember.
Well, that's okay, but Yeah, Fresnel lenses are magnificent.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I thought somebody invented this thing. And,
No, I just think it's one of those things that's been sort of part of my imagery for a very long time, and we came upon it in a way as a story, and so that's broadened and enlightened our view, helped us to visit all sorts of places where there are lighthouses. But I don't know if I would ever think of myself as quite an aficionado.
No,
I do. You know the
they're
book
good.
you suggested, that won the Caldecott medal, the lighthouse book.
Yeah, Hello Lighthouse by Sophie Blackall.
Yes, well, I read that. Now, I think she was much more than that. It was a lovely book, but she knew a lot more about lighthouses.
It had a lot of factual information,
Yeah.
really.
She did a lot.
But
She did.
it was a lovely book, I
Yeah.
have to say.
I love it.
But without sinking into romantic nonsense, there is something just about the dead of night with the absolute predictability of this light coming around and around. It's sad, but it's reassuring almost, you know.
Oh,
it's
yeah.
quite affecting, and that's it. You
Yeah.
know, it's. I just
And
think
the
it's
Lighthouse Keeper Stevensons, you know, the book.
Yes.
And the building of them is just remarkable.
Yeah,
And
this-
they'd get them so far and they'd be washed away, and innumerable people died.
100-ton granite blocks.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
Oh,
getting
there's
cut
so
off.
many aspects to it.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely, yes.
Yeah. So you convinced me you're lighthouse aficionados. You appreciate them.
Oh, hard not to. If you've had anything to do with the sea, anything to do with history of the sea, anything to do with places like Cornwall,
Yeah.
all those places where the ships would be washed ashore and everybody would try and get as much as they possibly could of. Oh, they set lights and they were
Yeah.
wrecked as well.
Yeah.
That was a pretty brutal business.
Well, around
And
here,
that happened down at Winchelsea, down on our coast. It was a very big area for that. They were bringing in
oh yeah.
champagne things from the
Well, the English Channel is the
Brutal.
busiest channel in the world. It still is, I think.
Yes, they're different sort of pirates, I think, these days. Yes, yeah. But it was, it's
I suppose in some of the titles we've always struck some kind of minor blow for feminism, perhaps. I mean, Mrs Grinling, I mean, he's not a chop short of the Barbie, is he? But he's not
That's an
terrible.
extremely
I'm sorry,
expressive
he's not the sharpest tool in the box. But Mrs. She quite often is, you know, I think she's the thinker of the two of them, and working, particularly when he's getting overweight, and she puts him on a diet.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
She's a little plump herself, of course, we forget that.
I appreciated that one because my wife and I kind of went through something like that where during the pandemic I lost a lot of weight.
I do have to say, you become very fond of your characters.
Oh, yeah.
Even though, yes, I mean, the more fond of them, I think probably as you go on and get to know them slightly more and wonder about what they might be thinking, even as you're writing about
Oh, yeah.
them.
Oh yeah, you down the beach. Do you see some guy did once with his little knotted handkerchief hat? He was plump, fat, and God, I thought I just did a double take. But there he is,
Just like Hamish came
yeah,
to
just
life.
like Hamish. I'll rush over and say, "How are you doing at the lighthouse?" But just like same sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, I have one more question for both of you, okay, for bonus points. All right. And the question is, what has been your favorite part of your involvement with the Lighthouse Keeper series of books over these years?
You go first.
Well, I would think, Jeremy, as I was saying before, the involvement of the audience with the children. This is not a book that's it's real. It's in the world. What's it doing in the world? Well, who's it affecting? And then you see them when you go to. There's a crocodile of kids going into one of our groups. One little girl turned to the other one and said, "I've been looking forward to this all week." You know, and there's things like, that was 30 years ago, and it's still in my head. So for me, it's the effect that these stories, and a grandmother will come up and say, "Look, I loved this when I was a kid." What can be better than that?
Yeah.
There can't be anything. For me, that's my lot.
Yes, I appreciate all of that.
No.
But for me, I think it's probably finding different aspects of the life that can be written about that will both interest children, interest me because I'm going to be writing about it, but also have some sort of reference, if you like. The last Lighthouse Keeper book we wrote was more or less requested by Scholastic because, of course, the plastic in the sea, all those sorts of things. Now, in fact, it's pretty hard to write about plastic in the sea for young children. They don't know whether it's plastic tin or whatever, but rubbish in the sea.
Yeah.
And I was I don't think it's the greatest book in the world at all, but because we could use the character who had since retired, it was wonderful to be able to use him in a different sort of way, and maybe having some effect of, I hope, somebody might think, oh, Mr Grinling didn't like that. I don't, they won't really think like that. But I was quite pleased to be writing something that was pertained to this world, if you like, and even more so in the future. So yeah, it's the thinking and the writing of it. I love doing the writing. Even if I have to write it 10 times, I love being involved for that.
And just as a coda to this, and then I'll shut up. But on the children thing, the other one was a child came along, a girl, 18, 19, doing work experience, okay, helping with exhibitions, come to do the schools and so on. And a lovely kid, and I said, what on earth you could be doing all work experience? Why'd you come to see Ronda and I? Oh, she said, that's easy. When I was 3 years old, I sat on the mat at the primary school, and you and Ronda came to visit. I'll never forget it as long as I live. You know, 3 years old, they take it in, you know. Once again, I'm on my hobby horse, but I was just thought, Jesus.
Yeah.
You know, how fantastic.
It is. Fall off a hobby horse.
No, I probably will, but I'll be a soft lady.
It's really special. I completely understand, and I love that you appreciate it so much.
Yeah. It's been a really good life, I have to say. And we've been lucky, as I say, we've also been very lucky. You can write a brilliant book, a brilliant any sort of book, and you'll have a very small audience. It may last, but we've been very lucky that it has lasted. It's not J.K. Rowling, we haven't sold millions around the world, but it's gone on chugging along, and that's actually fantastic.
A bit like the author and the illustrator, really.
Well, we're nearly 80 and we're still going strong. Well, strongish. Don't put that down.
Well, being good and lucky is a good combination. So.
It is indeed.
Yeah. Well, Ronda and David Armitage, I hate to stop because it's so delightful speaking with both of you.
Thank you.
It's great meeting you, and to do it in this special location at the Belle Tout Lighthouse here with Beachy Head, the lighthouse that's featured in your books, right here.
You're on the spot.
Yeah, it's what a treat this is.
And thank you for being a very gentle and probing interviewer, but in the nicest possible way.
Thank you so much.
I mean, even if you're hating it, I'd never have guessed.
Thank you so much for spending this time with me. I really appreciate it.
We've loved it.
Thank you for the invitation.
The Lighthouse Keeper's Lunch and all its sequels are available through Amazon and other online booksellers. Also, be sure to check out Ronda's website at rondaarmitage.co.uk. That's RONDAARMITAGE.co.uk, and David's website at davidarmitage.com.
Thanks so much to Ronda and David. They were very gracious to travel from their home to meet me at the Belle Tout Lighthouse. I love talking with them. I also want to thank my friends Jeremy and Babs Hawes of Operation Europe, who did so much to get me where I wanted to go on my trip to England in July, including Belle Tout. Had a great time with them. They were very kind and generous. I'll never forget it.
Thanks, of course, as always, to all the volunteers, members, and staff of the U.S. Lighthouse Society. Go to uslhs.org to learn about the Society's domestic and international tours and all the things the Society offers. Don't forget that donations and memberships help support this podcast. Please share word of this podcast on social media, and if you listen through a platform that allows you to post reviews, please rate and review us. And be sure to check out the current U.S. Lighthouse Society Art Challenge on Instagram.
I should also mention I will be leading or co-leading a U.S. Lighthouse Society tour on the northern Maine coast, October 8th to 14th. I think there's still space available on the tour. Go to uslhs.org/tours to read about it, along with all the other upcoming tours.
Speaking of travel, the French author Marcel Proust once wrote, quote, "The real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes," unquote.
On next week's episode of Lighthearted, we'll be talking to another children's book author, Anna Crowley Redding, whose new book, Courage Like Kate, is about Kate Moore, 19th century lightkeeper at Fairweather Island in Connecticut. To all our regular listeners and to our new ones, thanks so much for listening, and
keep a good light.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine.